Hello ladies and gentlemen, Big Daddy Top Hat here. For quite some time now I have been on an ambitious journey trying to cover every single entry in the sprawling Double Dragon series. By this point in time we have been through vast swaths of these games, starting out with the original arcade beat 'em up, right up until the likes of the 1980s inspired Double Dragon Neon. In today's content we shall be analysing the most recent entry that focuses around Bimmy and Jimmy's escapades, taking a look at 2017's Double Dragon 4, one of the most chronologically confusing titles ever bestowed upon a video game, which we will attempt to make some sense out of shortly. But apart from that, there is so much more for us to discuss, such as the game's controversial artistic direction, and the fact that journalists panned this game hard. Is this title really as bad as the mainstream claims? Let's try and get to the bottom of all of this hyperbole today, when we look at the newest instalment from the Double Dragon franchise. This, ladies and gentlemen, is the mad story of Double Dragon 4, a video game that many people think is a complete disgrace. Yeah. Considering all of the Double Dragon videos that I've made in the past, I do not think we need to dwell much on this franchise's history, as by this point we have covered that to death. Yoshihisa Kishimoto's groundbreaking cooperative beat 'em up would change gaming forever, with many franchises copying the blueprint Double Dragon had established. Thanks to IP holders Technos Japan, the series past the first two installments would be turbulent, as they would milk the Double Dragon license for all it was worth, allowing pretty much anyone the right to make Double Dragon games, and other media provided they were willing to pay, leading to all sorts of abominations. Technos Japan's poor business decisions would eventually come back to bite them in the arse, leading to the company's bankruptcy, which in turn led to the IP being purchased by Million and the fantastic Double Dragon Advance. As of today though, the franchise is now owned by Arc System Works, the same company who ported the original version of Double Dragon over to the Master System way back when. And bearing in mind that Arc System Works are responsible for high quality games such as the Guilty Gear series, Blaze Blue and Dragon Ball FighterZ, you would hope that this indicates that the franchise is currently in good hands. So it was interesting to speculate what direction Arc Systems would choose to go with the series first. Would we get another reboot like what we got with the Double Dragon Advance game, or maybe even a Double Dragon Neon 2, considering that so many gamers were fond of the previous Double Dragon Neon game? But nope, the Japanese firm would choose to take the franchise a different route completely. As great as some of the Double Dragon games have indeed been over the years, I think it would be tough to deny that in terms of popularity, the brand name has never quite been as huge of a deal as it was back in the 1980s. The first two arcade games are legendary for their impact, and the game's NES ports sold tremendously well too, fully cementing Double Dragon as a household name. So, like what had been tried many times before, Arc System Works would try to continue to channel nostalgia for this era, giving us the confusingly named Double Dragon 4. If you are clued up on this series, you'll be aware that in terms of chronologically numbered entries, the last instalment we would receive would be the versus fighting game named Double Dragon 5 in the 90s. So how are we back at Double Dragon 4 in the modern era? Well, let me try my best to answer this rather confusing question. Well, we first got 3 Double Dragon arcade games. The first 2 we ported over to the NES and other devices, whereas the third NES Double Dragon game would be a different Double Dragon 3 to what was available in the arcades, giving us 2 different Double Dragon 3s. Moving into the 16-bit era, the 4th Double Dragon game on Nintendo hardware would be a console exclusive, simply titled Super Double Dragon. But by the next installment in the series, they switched back to their numbering system, calling the next entry Double Dragon 5, leaving us all to infer that Super Double Dragon was Double Dragon 4. But no, apparently we were all wrong, as Double Dragon 4 would not see release until 2017. What makes this matter more confusing is there are now tons of different Double Dragon games out there, most of which do not have a number fixed to their titles. So how does this game justify being called Double Dragon 4, you may ask? Well, the only logical conclusion I could manage to draw from all of this was that this game is the 4th game in the series to feature NES style sprite work. But even if that is the case, that now makes Double Dragon 5's existence confusing, as that game features different artwork completely. So it all remains very confusing, even if you attempt to make sense of the incredibly stupid name. But all in all, I guess it looks like Arc System Works were attempting to cash in on Double Dragon NES nostalgia, and hoping that most fans of the classic Double Dragon series were so out of touch with the franchise that they simply did not realise that the series would continue past the NES game. That's my explanation for this complete nonsense anyway. Now, when it comes to this game, I would say the first issue with it, and what is very off-putting for most, would be this game's graphics. It is a stylistic choice unlikely to really please anyone, so let me try to explain why. While Double Dragon games were available on the NES, I would surmise that practically everyone was very aware that they were playing graphically scaled down ports that had been made to optimise the NES's hardware. The Double Dragon arcade games were visually a different league to what could be found on the NES, but gamers would on the whole be pleased nonetheless, as the game still delivered a decent experience. Despite this though, it would be tough to argue that playing Double Dragon on the NES was the best way to play the games, as not only were the games stronger in the arcades, but the games were better on other hardware, such as the PC Engine for example, which delivered much more beautiful Double Dragon gameplay. This is before we even mention the impressive reimaginings such as Double Dragon Advance, as well as the fact that Double Dragon NES games had evolved into Super Double Dragon on the Super Nintendo. So keeping all of this in mind, it was extremely disappointing to many gamers that Arc System Works would choose to make a new Double Dragon game sharing graphical elements with some of the most graphically pitiful versions of Double Dragon that had ever been created. Hell, if you're going to nuke the graphics like this, why not go to the most primitive presentation and make Double Dragon in the style of the ZX Spectrum conversion, eh? Well, I'll tell you why. Arc System Works were very clearly choosing to rip off NES graphics simply because the game sold better on that system than any others in history. So with Double Dragon 4, they shamelessly attempted to appeal to the nostalgia of the Double Dragon conversions that had the largest install base, rather than making any attempt whatsoever to produce the best Double Dragon game possible. The transparency of this whole plan would, in my opinion, put a lot of gamers off even trying this one, including myself until recently, as if they truly wanted to make the best retro Double Dragon game possible, they would make it look like this rather than this, surely, as this only ever looked like this due to hardware limitations. No one ever actually wanted their games to ever look this ugly. Yet on powerful modern hardware, Arc System Works had the audacity to release a game that looks like these horrible looking NES games on purpose. Come on guys, we could all see straight through what you were trying to do. In fact, from what I've seen online, these games' graphics would not appeal to many who like the NES itself either, as there are inconsistencies throughout the game that detract from it looking 8-bit to begin with, such as backgrounds with far too much detail, and many other elements that do not look old school whatsoever. In some ways, this makes Double Dragon 4 feel very cheap and tacky, and the default background music offering modern sound makes the game feel even more like it is suffering from an identity crisis. The presentation in this game is unlikely to please anyone. Predictably, the game would be torn a new one by various online gaming journalists. IGN would write, "Double Dragon 4 patently ignores the lessons of history. It slavishly works to emulate, both in look and controls, a game that was quickly iterated on, and left behind by a slew of other arcade beat-em-ups. Even compared to the classics that immediately supplanted its predecessor, Double Dragon 4 feels shallow and dated." Nintendo Life would also hate the game, writing Double Dragon 4 is a prime example of how not to do a revival, which is ironic when you consider that the way forward made Double Dragon Neon did a much better job back in 2012. The use of NES-style graphics isn't a negative in itself, but too little has been done to refine and improve gameplay, which even back in the late 80s was showing its age. Push Square would further criticise the game, stating, "Double Dragon 4 plays the nostalgia card harder than most, but its narrow-sighted reliance on this has left it feeling like a relic that perhaps shouldn't have been disturbed." After all of these reviews had been published, Double Dragon 4 would receive an embarrassingly low 49% on Metacritic, which is disgracefully low when we take into consideration that most bad AAA releases still seem to get at least 70% overall from critics. So is the game as awful as many journalists would claim it to be, or is it just the extremely ugly NES style graphics that are putting most people off? Obviously, the only true way to answer this question was to play through the entirety of this game myself, which I managed to achieve during one of my Twitch streams earlier this week. So let me try my hardest to explain to you my experiences with this very controversial game. Obviously, like many others, for the record, I am not a fan of this game's graphics, or NES graphics in general, and I tire of so many video games trying to copy a style that only ever existed in the first place due to system limitations. But obviously, being a man of culture, I am capable of looking beyond this game's abysmal graphics, even if they are uglier than a bulldog chewing a wasp. The game's story occurs after the brothers Bimmy and Jimmy have defeated the Black Warriors gang, and now the brothers are on a quest to establish dojos up and down the country that teach their Sosetsuken martial arts. In doing so, they run into new trouble in the form of a gang known as the Renegades. The Renegades team up with the remnants of the Black Warriors gang to rid the world of the Lees once and for all. The game is laced with cutscenes between the action in this game's 12 stages, building on the events of the game further, with even Marion being captured by this new threat during the story. The main villains of the game are two twin sisters from Japan named Casey and Shannon, who function as the brothers' final opponents in the title. They are no Skullmageddon, that's for sure, but at least more interesting than some of the boring main antagonists the series has had in the past. Playing this game in front of a live audience on Twitch was certainly interesting, and something I'm going to do more often going forward to gather extra insight. For example, I picked up very quickly that many people despised this game's default music, as it clashed so badly with the game's graphical presentation. Thankfully, on the main menu there was an option to change the music to retro, which I must admit was a wise decision, as suddenly the graphics and sound married up way better, so no idea why retro was not the default sound setting to begin with. Bizarre, eh? Speaking of inconsistencies, I have to admit there is something very wrong looking with 8-bit style video games being presented from a 16:9 aspect ratio. Personally, I think the game would have looked better if they placed all the action in this one within a 4x3 box, because you should either go retro or go home in my opinion. It is design choices like this that make Double Dragon 4 just such a bizarre game to look at. The game definitely struggles to go all in with old school aesthetics at points, which in turn makes it feel even more cash grabby. Upon first embarking on my Double Dragon 4 journey, I will admit at times I yawned on occasion at the game's rudimentary gameplay that in many ways mirrored the NES entries in the series. There were many extremely frustrating points where I would get knocked on the floor by a group of enemies and they would dogpile on me to such a degree that my character would not be able to get up and in turn would lose a lot of life that way. If they were going to release a game that was not completely faithful to its NES counterparts, then the least they could do was fix combat problems like this, as it was certainly very irritating at points. Speaking of NES related issues, the game had a lot of platforming elements. Now if you have played Double Dragon arcade games, you will know platforming is sparse, but with the NES home conversions, extra platforming was added to the games to make them more Mario-like. I guess because every game had to have some sort of platforming on the NES, even beat 'em ups for some bizarre reason. This unneeded element is brought over to Double Dragon 4, and all I can say is wow, Bimmy and Jimmy are not optimised for platforming. The jump physics are diabolical and I often find myself frustratingly losing lives simply down to the game's poor platforming controls that would often result in me falling down pits. To lose more lives in a beat 'em up through platforming rather than fighting is a complete joke if you ask me. And in my opinion, tricky platforming should not have any place within the Double Dragon franchise to begin with. Let Super Mario handle this side of things. Stay in your lane, Bimmy and Jimmy. Now, as you can probably tell from all of this, Double Dragon 4 is a very easy game to criticise. It's full of inconsistencies and it's frustrating at points. But what I will admit, that despite all of this, and despite having little in the way of nostalgia for the NES, somehow I still ended up having a lot of fun with this game, and the people who were live in Twitch chat had fun watching it too. So let me discuss with you the upsides of the game. The upsides that were overlooked by all the journalists that covered the game 4 years ago. Now the first thing that is worth noting was how freaking cheap this game was to purchase. On Steam the title only set me back £5.54. The same price the title has been available for since launch to my knowledge. So despite journalists heavily criticising the game, near all of them neglected to mention that Double Dragon 4 was never presented as anything more than a budget game from day one. So paying such a small amount for Double Dragon 4, you would not expect the game to be the greatest Double Dragon game ever, and the cheap price point makes its flaws much more excusable than say the likes of Cyberpunk or Fallout 76, games that were very expensive at launch but absolutely awful. I think far more people would be willing to give Double Dragon 4 a chance if they were to realise how cheap it was, and for £5.54 I feel I have already had my money's worth of fun with it thus far. Value to quality ratio, I think the game's a bargain, which not one gaming review publication pointed out to its readers. The very budget Double Dragon 4 though delivers everything a gamer could possibly want from a budget game. Simple pick up and play fun. While it has its frustrations, the game's combat is intuitive enough to get a lot of enjoyment from, and the game's stages offer enough variety to keep the player amused at least for a few hours. Even elements that were annoying, such as the game's platforming, was quick and easy enough to overcome after a few attempts. And all in all, I cannot deny that I wanted to play the game all the way through to completion, even if it had been simply for enjoyment. Perhaps what surprised me the most though was the amount of unlockables that this game had to offer, giving the game a layer of replayability that you would not even necessarily expect to find in such a budget title. To put it simply, as you play through the game's story mode, you slowly unlock various sprites who had previously functioned as enemies, to then be able to play as them within the game's one-on-one versus fighting mode, between two gamers. But there is more to unlocking than that, as if gamers manage to beat the story mode, they then unlock an additional tower mode which acts as an enemy gauntlet. While this concept may sound very basic, it is once again more layered than you would expect, because as players get better at this mode, it allows gamers to unlock enemy sprites as playable characters once more, but this time allows them to use them in the game's story mode and within tower mode itself. So the tower offers a ton of room for experimentation, allowing gamers to experiment using all of these different new characters. In this game you can even unlock Sonny Lee, the forgotten third Lee brother, who apart from in this game only appeared in the arcade version of Double Dragon 3, so he makes a welcome return within this one. So to summarise my thoughts on this one, yes, I think it is as ugly as sin, yes, I think this game is flawed, and no, it is not the new Double Dragon game I have craved. But the game certainly has a lot of redeeming features for a game that has always been available at the bargain bucket price of $7 US. When you see how cheap this game is, there is nothing to complain about. And if you want something pick up and play with tons of unlockables and replayability, then the game with the stupidest name in the world is certainly worth the pennies it cost. I struggle to see how anyone could hate this game, unless they have done nothing but scratch the surface. Double Dragon 4 may have been the best $5 I have spent this year, so pay no attention to the gaming press who have told you not to pick this one up. There is a lot of fun to be had under this game's ugly presentation, so I guess the game is not a disgrace, but the lazy gaming press is. However, we are not learning anything new in that regard. So ladies and gentlemen, that was the mad story of Double Dragon 4. That just about brings us up to scratch with the entire Double Dragon timeline on this channel. But I still have a few loose ends to go back to if there is any call for it, such as Double Dragon iOS and Double Dragon Billy Goes Postal that was only available for the Game Gear. So let me know in the comments if deep dives on these entries are of any interest to you. On my wrestling channel, Top Hat Wrestling Man, I should have an episode covering the man who fell in love with a mop. So now make sure you subscribe to my work over there. And if you want to see me play games before I cover them on this channel, be sure to follow me on twitch.tv/TopPatGameManLive. I am live on Tuesdays and Saturdays at 8 PM BST, so why not come along and suggest some games for me to play next? Finally, I would like to give a thank you to those who support this channel on Patreon, providing funding to help assist me in working on content full time. What you do for this channel is always highly appreciated, and I hope you continue to enjoy the additional incentives you receive. Shoutouts go out to Sebastian Velez, A Murder of Crows, Carl Johnson, Heyo Paulo Lopez, Nostalgia Collector Ben Harradine, Corey Marsh Sr., Capcom vs SNK, BXL Gotham, Rowan Dinched, Evan Border, Philip Manth, Azure Arkai, Keith Ferguson, Joachim Varela, Mike Cullix, Ago, Jordan Durant, Angel Light 85, Ian Boyle, Nick Daniels, Princess Zana, Daniel Daly, Computer Man, House of a Ted, Gary Pinkett, Easy Professor, Kid Anime, Justin Wang, Aaron McNamara, Hermes Gonzalez, Instant Gratification Monkey, Man Shovel, James Bishop, JB, Michael Hall, Wesley Sanghi, Felatio, Langston Miller, New, Brian Barry, Sarah Powell, Vladimir Renee, Marvin Liga, Chris Call, TOG Driver, Adrian Hannington, Bernard NG, Richard Stu Stewart, Dan Van Damme, Lewis Fiant, John Bates, David Bale, Chris Fisk, Mike Bruno, Rick67, Antonio Rodriguez, Craig Jenkins, Retroverse.com, Casey Wright, Synth Spaces, Zai, Andrew Bazansky, Alex Summers, Gunther Hendricks, and everybody else who backs my channel on Patreon. Thank you so much. Yeah, cheerio.